Look, so what I meant to say about this, which I don't think I've conveyed everything that I meant in words, really. Look, this is like this is basically Edward Kirk's book, right? The first part of the Institutes of the Law of England, but he called it a commentary upon Littleton, right? His title of it originally was A Commentary upon Littleton, which is actually ironic and in humour, because every time that someone gets granted privileges, they say that they've been enlarged, right? If the person is going to be enlarged or not. So the whole point of it, like, he's called his book A Commentary upon Littleton, right? So it's got some humour in that. But here, right, the particular edition of the book, this is what it says, because William Prince published some commentaries on him as well. Listen to this. It says, printed by William Rawlins, Samuel Roycroft and H. Sawbridge, a sign of Richard Atkins and Edward Atkins, Esquires, and are to be sold by Christopher Wilkinson and Richard Tonson and Jacob Tonson at the Black Boy in Fleet Street, within Gray's Inn Gate, next to Gray's Inn Lane, and the Judge's Head in Chancery Lane near Fleet Street. Now, so that's actually quite extremely interesting, that a book, upon being published, printed within the book, it says that it is this edition of a book was to be sold at particular places, right? The book was to be sold at these particular locations and places, right? And one of them is at Gray's Inn. Now, Gray's Inn was where all the lawyers studied. It was like the college, you know, the university of it was basically where all the, you know, the Eton or all of the well-educated lawyers went to learn, right? They either went to Gray's Inn or to Lincoln's Inn, right? It was usually one or the other, Gray's Inn or Lincoln's Inn, right? So this book was to be sold at a bookshop near Gray's Inn, right? And I also mentioned the Judge's Head. So it's quite funny now. Why does that mean anything? What does that mean? Well, it means that people, like in those days, right? It means that they wanted this book to be sold and bought by people who were going to Gray's Inn, right? Well, that would have been people like, you know, Tony Blair. Because Tony Blair went to those type of places, right? You know, it would be the type of book that they would, you know, all of the, you know, really all of the, anyone who was into politics, right, and who did law courses in those days really would have bought and read these books and known about them and known about the law in these books and the rights. People like David Cameron, you know, and this is the thing. These type of books, people like David Cameron and Tony Blair, right, are educated on things like this when they come out of Eton and Oxford, and, you know, whether or not they do law schools or not, they're usually educated in this if they want to do a career in politics or if they want to do a law. It's just the type of thing that they educate them in, right? But this is the thing. It's like they want all these private school educated people from the upper classes to know this information, but they don't really want other people to know it, right? They don't really want all of the, you know, the commoners and the working class to know about it. Now, ironically, it says that here, as for Edward Coke himself, it says the second, third and fourth parts were published posthumously in 1642 and 1644 after being seized by the crown at his death. So these books were that they're that relevant and that important, particularly informing people about these special rights and, you know, usage of Parliament, a little bit like an earlier version of Erskine May type of thing, that the crown seized them after his death. Actually, William Prynne, remember, for publishing books on these subjects, right? William Prynne got arrested illegally and he got put away in like 3 castles for like 3 years and he had his ears chopped off, right? William Prynne actually had his ears chopped off for what he'd been, putting out in books and publishing, right? And he got all his stuff seized. But he did, in his later life, end up as an MP, right? And, working in the, looking after Keeper of the Records in the Tower of London, right? But he was actually held prisoner for a number of years in these castles without a little bit like they're holding people now with a terrorist act, without actually any proper legitimate charges against him or anything, right? So not only William Prynne, but also, actually, I didn't know that after Sir Edward Coke's death, all his stuff got seized, his books and that. Now, William Prynne called out Edward Coke a lot of times on errors in his books, and William Prynne, published a correction book of errors in it. I think Coke did republish, but John Hatzel actually commends... Well, actually, John Hatzel... William Prynne did criticise Coke on quite a lot of things, but John Hatzel he does praise both William Prynne and he praises Coke as well. And John Hatzel did work in Parliament, right, so he's a legitimate source, the book that I got, the Baron Denman book on constitutional law, it's a good book, but it's actually... it only really confirms and summarises it. The Edward Coke book is really probably... You see, you've got to know what you're actually talking about. And the thing with the Erskine May book is that the Erskine May book confirms the procedures for Parliament, but it doesn't really clarify and confirm what it is that we're actually doing, right? What is this, right? Now, you can read the Observation of Due Process of Law 1368. That's what we're doing, right? And you can read the Bill of Rights, but the Bill of Rights is always doubted, right? It's like, how can this be so explicit? It's always doubted by the police, by the CPS, by the courts. They don't take it seriously. It's an act of English law, right? Written in English. It's not that difficult to understand it. But it's always, when you go to the courts, it's the criminal procedure rules, it's the civil procedure rules, where you're being prosecuted under the, Criminal Damage Act 1971. It's all modern acts. Well, this is an act of law, right? And it's like they don't take it seriously, and I don't know why that is, when everything is actually made for the usage of all these things, like the overriding objectives in the criminal procedure rules, recognising the rights of the defendants and the needs of other cases. It's, in fact, it's specifically tailor-made. It's like, it was, was my suit, your suit, it's like Savile Row, was my suit. But the courts don't, they're like, doo, they're just like, their eyes glaze over and they're just like, they're just like, I don't know. I mean, I spoke to 3 lawyers. I got my lawyer to do it, and she really didn't want to do it, and I had to, ride her like a bloody bronco, right? Like a buckaroo, right? To get her to go in there and do it, right? She really didn't want to do it. I made her do it. She went in, she did it, and I got it accepted at one hearing. So it wasn't taken as absolute tosh, right? It was like, this is legitimate. Unfortunately, I got swapped out for a different judge, like a lot of people do, and I got scammed later on. But I didn't get any help later on. I tried to do it myself. But actually, if I knew what I knew now, that first hearing, then it would have been over and done with. I think I'm quite confident now that if I'd have gone back in there, they asked me a question, and if I'd and I know what answer that I said to that question. Because they said to me, do you want this heard? They asked me, where would you like this heard, right? They said, do you want it dealt with the magistrates' court, or do you want it dealt with the Crown Court, right? And I know what my answer now would have been, but I didn't know this back then. I would have said, excuse me, I said, this is a case with Parliament. Do you know that you need a petition for leave of court to mention this in this court to hear the matter? And you can check the 1980 resolution of both houses of Parliament, and also I've got a right to be heard at the Bar of Parliament. At that moment there and then, back then, that would have And if I said also, by the way, it's a contempt, it's misconduct against petitioners. It's contempt of Parliament. Like, it's not a matter of me. It's a matter of, that I think that would have that would have actually been the I wish I could have just like in Back to the Future or whatever, or in what sort of a Quantum Leap or something. I was actually sat there thinking that there's got to be something. I knew that I'd already submitted all my evidence and facts and stuff like that, but they just weren't they weren't having any of it. And it's like, well, they were when it comes up when it comes out of your solicitor or lawyer. Say whenever you say it, they just try to mug you off. But if it comes out of your lawyer or barrister or whatever, then they always take it on. But I mean, I did get my barrister to do it, but she was like, she didn't want to. And then afterwards, when we were walking down the road outside the court, was really kind of like a really brilliant moment. It was like, wow, they just took that on. They actually accepted it. But I got another hearing set. But really, it should have been over there and then. But if I could have just passed a message back to myself, a little message saying, when they ask you where you want it heard, right, say that they've got to get a petition to leave of court to mention it, right, and say why it heard by Parliament. And then also mention that, the John Tinker a little bit from the Petitions Committee report. And I think, I'm pretty sure that would have done it because she'd once she'd delivered it, we were on, thought it was all on and it was proper official. And it was okay, it's just a shame that I didn't know that little bit then, because that would have been just a little bit of magic on it, what I needed at that time. But it just unfortunately didn't turn out like that because I got set up with a fool who basically said that no such thing exists when clearly it does exist. But it's a shame. But anyway, so, this is serious stuff. And this is what we're talking about now. All these Extinction Rebellion cases, all these Just Stop Oil cases, all these Defend Our Jury cases, all this ridiculous people getting arrested for holding signs of Palestine when it's clearly canvassing for a Parliament cause, right? That they're not terrorists. You cannot prescribe a legal process. You can't prescribe legal proceedings and say that you can't do legal proceedings, right? Which canvassing is like a witness appeals, right? It's just a shame because, they really don't like this, these judges. The judges hate this. They really don't like it. And they never liked it back in 1670 with William Prynne and William Mead. They didn't like it back then. Even when, William Prynne and Mead had been accused of, William Prynne and Mead had been accused of breaking the law, and the jury was trying to back them up, right? And they didn't even like the fact that the jury was backing them. But when this is what they don't like about the Ian Bray case, when the jury acquitted Ian Bray, and now they're trying to get rid of the juries and scrap them, right? They hate this. They really don't like it. And I think that it's quite novel that, when they're selling all these books to people like, Tony Blair and David Cameron type people, but also, William Prynne and, let's not forget, William Prynne and John Hatzel and Erskine May themselves, these people. But there's always the villains. The villains like to get hold of these books and use them for their own ends, to evil ends, like Tony Blair, perverting the whole country's legislation, setting the judges against their oaths and, sending us to war and, creating the Senedd illegally and all these ridiculous things that they've done. And denying us these rights, but yet when it comes to themselves, that they want they've got bookshops on the corner. Make sure you sell this. Make sure you sell these books outside, grazing or whatever on the corner of the street. Make sure when little Tony Blair's walking around the corner with his little satchel bag, for school, make sure he can get his books that he wants and needs to learn about. And David Cameron as well, right? But but then on the flip side, they're the Crown are seizing them all, right? It's got to be a serious book when the Crown are seizing them all. Almost like Paul Golding's van with, Keir Starmer as a wanker on the side of it, I mean, these books have got to be as hot as, Paul Golding's Britain First van with Keir Starmer as a wanker on the side of it. The police were straight onto that, But these books, they were shutting these books down. And William Prynne, got all his stuff seized and got his ears chopped off. But obviously later on, he actually ended up becoming an MP. But that's basically what I meant when I said, talking about what's all this Tony Blair death penalty. Well, the first thing that Tony Blair did was abolish the death penalty for treason, right? So make sure that he protects himself, Well, when Tony Blair's going to be tinkering with the law and messing around, just to protect himself, make sure that he didn't get into trouble, when he's setting justices against their oaths and making favours and deals for justice when people confess in respect to person's conscience. Well, actually, I keep saying that's Tony Blair, but I think it was John Major did it, but it was just on the Passover. It was just like the Feast of the Passover, isn't it? It's like they just passed over to Blair, and Blair had actually been an MP. They voted it through Parliament, right? So, Blair had been, I think, in Parliament for something like 18 or 19 years. I didn't know that Tony Blair had been an MP for a long time. I didn't know that. I thought he'd just, popped up like Beetlejuice and gone, Shazam, I'm Tony Blair, and then he went around and shook everyone's ends and then got elected and then was Prime Minister. I didn't know the backstory for Tony Blair because I never looked into it, I didn't know. I didn't read it. Tony Blair's he'd been in Parliament for a lot of years, so he'd had a lot of time to get to know the processes, get to know the procedures, plot and scheme. But there was a programme on that said, oh yeah, Tony Blair was always going around shaking everyone's hand and going, oh, I'm Tony Blair, right? And climbing the ladder of society, they made it sound like that he just, became an MP and then just became Prime Minister. But apparently he'd actually been in there a long time. So he'd definitely been plotting and scheming what he wanted to do, clearly probably with the rest of his party when he did that, death penalty stunt. And then obviously, I don't know whether he voted for or against. I'll actually look at the votes. Maybe Tony Blair voted against, deals for justice. He might have done. We could check it out. I might have a look and see if he voted for or against it. Because if he voted against it, then, fair enough. Maybe he shouldn't hold that against him for that. But there's plenty of other things that Blair's done which are highly questionable. I'll definitely go look at the votes for the act that they put through just before the Labour government. So that's what I meant by this post, just not to be confused.